What's up, everyone? Sean CountBlagorath here today with an album review, this time of the 2013 Unique Leader Records release of Dingir by Rings of Saturn. If you're not familiar with Rings of Saturn, they are a technical deathcore band that has been around for a few years, and I must say their debut album, in my personal opinion, is one of the best technical deathcore albums ever, and I would probably put that in my favorite technical death metal albums, period. List, if probably my top 10 or so. It's a great album that I've listened to countless times. So when I found out that Rings of Saturn were going to put out a new album, I was extremely excited. Upon the first listen of this album, when they released it back in October as a free download and stream, which is still up, by the way, I was kind of, at first, really, how should I put it? I was enjoying the album immensely when I first heard it. And I think it was mostly because it's just the shock value of, oh my god, it's brand new Rings of Saturn. But as I dived deeper into it more and more, I started to find quite a few things that bothered me, and I just kind of stopped listening to it after a little while. Well, this came in the mail, and I gave it a few more listens, and I have a few things to say. First and foremost, these guys are incredible musicians. Their musicianship is just top-notch. They are extremely talented, they know what they're doing, and I cannot fault them on any front with that. If you can even try to argue that these guys are bad musicians, you're an absolute retard, because they're phenomenal. That's not a subjective thing, that's objective. They are talented musicians. Now, with that said, I feel like there's some problems in the songwriting department. Just because you're a great musician doesn't mean you can write great songs. For me, a great song is something I can remember. A great song is something that doesn't have a lot of forced parts. And to me, this album has quite a few parts that feel forced. An example of that is the song Hyperforms. I like crazy patterns when it comes to the kick drum and the guitar, but I feel like they went overboard with some of the patterns. Hyperforms is too fast of a pattern in my personal opinion. The reason why I say that is it sounds almost inhuman. Granted, I know they are a alien core band, and that's kind of their thing, is the inhuman sounds. But to me, I like the human element within the music. And to me, this album really lacks that severely, especially because of the production, which I'll get to in a little bit. I feel like some of the patterns are way too spastic and way too fast for its own good, because it sounds really choppy and really just inhuman, and in my opinion, it doesn't sound that great. When they do actual riffs and some technical death metal parts, such as some of the sweeps and taps and some of the melodies that they create, are really good, and those are actually the memorable parts. And even the breakdowns, which a lot of people say breakdowns are the most forgettable thing, I feel like some of theirs are some of the most memorable parts of the album. And I like that a lot, because that's what the first album had too. Although I feel like the first album was a little generic when it came to the breakdowns, they've definitely improved the patterns that they do within the breakdowns. Now, another complaint I have when it comes to the guitar work on this, besides the choppy riffs, is some of the parts to the technical parts, as I said before, feel kind of forced. And when I say it, it feels like filler, and there was no real direction with it. It's kind of like, well, we need this song to be 3 minutes, so let's fill in 30 seconds with a sweep, tat, arpeggio, variation, or whatever it is. I'm not exactly a guitarist. I'm learning guitar at the moment. But to me, it just feels kind of forced. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that part, but to my ears, at least, it sounds forced, because there could have been better things happening right there instead of doing a constant sweeping and tapping, which gets out of control really fast. I mean, Galactic Cleansing is a great example of that. Now, when it comes to the guitar tone itself, the tone is really, really good. It's a great middle-of-the-road tone for what they're doing. The cleans and the taps and the sweeps cut right through perfectly. It is really loud, and I think it could have been turned down just a tiny bit in the mix, but I'll get to the mix in a little bit. I feel like the bottom end of the guitar really shines through in the breakdowns and the slams and that sort of stuff, which is really cool. And I'm glad that they were able to mix a really good tone to fit within the technical bits and pieces of the album. Because a lot of bands will either have really great tone for sweeps, but terrible tone for the chugs and the heavy parts, or vice versa. They have found a great middle of the road tone. One of my favorite parts of the guitar on here actually is the song Immaculate Order. That has an actually, quite honestly, it's weird to say this when I talk about Rings of Saturn, is there's a beautiful melody within the actual riff. When I heard that for the first time, like, that is stunning, and it's just a gorgeous sounding riff, and it works so well. And it was nice to hear melody being thrown in here because that adds to the variation, which is something that they kind of lacked once again, and I'm glad to see they're adding in more elements to their music. When it comes to some of the bass work is amazing. It kind of sticks with what the guitar is doing, but it's not anything that's boring or monotonous. It's still really good. The tone sounds great. I wish they would have turned it up just a little bit more in the mix and put the guitar down a little bit. But other than that it sounds great. Once again, great tone for technical death metal. Usually bands of this genre have horrible bass tones that are extremely flat and plastic sounding. This has a tiny bit of a plasticky sound, but to me it's still sounds really good and adds a lot of balls to parts in the album. Now I'm coming to a few of my biggest gripes with this. The drums. The drums itself, like what's being played, is amazing. The drummer is absolutely one of the best drummers going in metal right now when it comes to what he's playing, with the gravity blast, the insane fills, unique kick patterns. All of that is really, really good. It's the actual sound of the drums that turns me off so much. I understand the need for triggering and resampling drums, because when it comes to gravity blast especially, it's very hard to detect without a trigger, because you're kind of doing technically one of the hits is a rim hit. I understand that, and a trigger actually detects that, where a microphone it's hard to detect. The snare is one of possibly the most annoying things I have heard on any album, period. Especially in the gravity blast. When the slow parts are happening, like the breakdowns and some of the more straightforward death metal parts, it sounds really good, the snare. It's a perfect sound. But when the gravities and some of the more faster straight blasts come in, that's when the snare really gets on my nerves. Just because there's no fade on it, it's just a straight punch, it sounds like it was programmed. I know it wasn't programmed, but that's how it sounds. And to me, that is really, really annoying. The kick drum sounds really good when you can hear it, and that was a complaint I had with the stream they had up, which was I couldn't hear the kick drum at all, but at least with the CD version, I know it's supposed to be a high quality stream and download, I feel like the CD quality is much better, and I can actually hear the kick drum, which is great. It's a little clicky, once again. I'm not a fan of clicky drums, but it still has a really strong punch to it, which sounds great, and it really helps to add to the heaviness of the breakdowns and the slams and the death metal parts. I mean, part of the heaviness of an album is the actual drum sound, and I'm glad they know that, because they actually made some of the drums sound heavy, especially the kicks, which in my opinion needs to be the heaviest sounding drum. The toms, they sound way too plasticky, they sound way too thin for me personally. But if you're into that sort of thing, you'll dig it. I personally don't really care for that. When it comes to the cymbals, everything sounds great, and what's being done is awesome. Now it's time for my second major gripe with this album. Now, what I'm about to say is not an insult to Ian. He is an amazing vocalist. I've watched his live videos. I've watched his covers. He has tons of power in his voice. His lows are incredibly low. His highs are amazing. And live, he nails everything perfectly. With that said, I don't know what the hell happened, but they added a very strange EQ, and it sounds like they completely cut the low out of the low vocals. If they would have done this for a few parts of the album, I think it would have been good, but they did it for every single time he does low vocals. There's no actual, what's the thing I'm looking to say? The lows just don't sound low. They sound kind of like more of an airy mid, and I don't like airy sounding vocals where it has a lot of echo to it, where it just sounds very weak. And the lows sound really weak. If they would have actually had him sound low like he does live, there would have been parts that would have been just disgusting. But the vocals just don't have that part to it. The highs, on the other hand, sound phenomenal. They sound identical to what their old vocalist was doing, which is a great thing because, well, he was a great vocalist. But there was something that was done in the mixing or the mastering or when they were doing the EQ on the vocals that really just messed that part up for me. But if some people like the vocals, and that's great. If you do, cool. I'm not a big fan of it. And also, you'll notice in the background of some of the songs, you'll hear keyboards and stuff like that, like on the song Objective to Harvest. Great stuff being utilized that adds another layer to the music, which is great to hear. Overall, there's a lot of steps that are in the right direction for this band and a lot of things that need to be changed. Some of the stuff in the songwriting department when it comes to the technical parts should be changed a little bit. In my personal opinion, I'm not saying that I'm going to hate them if they don't. I'm still going to love Rings of Saturn. The production really holds this back a lot. For me, I would say that this would be a phenomenal album if it had better production. And they would have kind of skimped back on some of the patterns within the songs. But they didn't. And I love some parts and I don't love some parts. So this is a very hard thing for me to score. I'm going to give this a light 7 out of 10. It's good. It's something that a lot of Rings of Saturn fans love or are going to love when they hear it. It's something that I think Rings of Saturn fans will definitely dig. I recommend you check out their first album before you check out this one if you want to understand kind of what they're doing, because a lot of people don't get it and they just despise them. I think they should check out their first album before they get into this. But I say give this album a shot if you want to get into them. It's still a very good album, and simply for the artwork alone, I would say buy the CD because this is amazing stuff. I love the artwork to this. The back looks amazing, and the disc is ridiculous looking. But yeah, I'm going to have to give this a light 7 out of 10. Check it out. You got nothing to lose. There's a free stream of it. If you like it, buy it. If you don't, it's whatever. But definitely buy it if you do like it. They deserve your support, so does Unique Leader Records. But that's it, everyone. Light 7 out of 10. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And as always, keep it metal.